Welcome back, class. Today we are covering session 5 on the topic of burial and funerary rituals. And our topic deals with, of course, death. And we know death is inevitable. Where there is life, there is death. And this is where, for many cultures and belief systems, this is the most important part of their human existence, how they deal with the body, how they treat the body, and the concepts of what happens when the person dies. And we know in many cultures as well, we fear death. We do everything within our power to keep it away. But nonetheless, when the person passes on, when the human passes on, how we deal with it has everything to do with our belief system and our culture. Joseph Campbell, well-known mythologist, notes that funerary burial rites were the first religious phenomenon carried out by human beings. And this is well before hunting rituals. And he notes that this may be the case because this is perhaps the most existential question that human beings faced. They began to question what is life? Perhaps what happens when we die? Is there an afterlife? Where does the essence of the human being goes? And so from here, we know that how we treat the body once it dies has everything to do with the belief system and with the culture and the concepts of what happens to the essence of the human being. All right. So when a person dies, how the people around the individual, whether it be family, friends, society, caretakers, how they deal with the body, how they respond to this is based on the person's belief system or is structured within their culture on how they are to deal with the body. So here is where we find that culture provides the guidelines of how to treat and care for the body. And we also see culture in action here, or the belief system in action here, because this is where we can see the ideas of what is life, what happens after the person dies, and ideas of the afterlife. You know, does a person return? Do they believe in reincarnation? Or where exactly does the essence of the person go? And before we dive into these examples today, we do want to make a difference, note the difference between burial rites and ancestor cults. I don't want you to confuse the two. Burial rites, as I just explained, is how members of society, the living members of society, treat the body, dispose of the body, care for the body. How they clean it, how they treat it, how they dress it, do they burn it, do they bury it, and these ideas of what is taking place at that moment and how important it is for them, how they mourn, etc. So ancestor cults is different. Ancestor cults, as I had explained, is how living members of society maintain a communication, a relationship with those in their lineage, in their family, their ancestors, how they maintain a relationship with them once they have died. And we saw examples of this, as in the case of the Mayas, where they celebrate Day of the Dead. And we see different traditions in Mexico, concepts of how long the anima, the soul, can return to visit them, or how people maintain communication with them to get guidance for their current actions, for their way of life. So that's maintaining that communication and relationship. Those are ancestor cults. But how we deal with the body would be burial, funerary rites that we'll talk about today. All right, so in these funeral rites, we know that they are considered as well a rites of passage. It's the last rites of passage of human existence. And the body and the human undergoes all those three stages that we've covered several times. The separation, that liminality, and that change in status. So this is where in these examples, in these archaeological evidence, in these funerary practices that we see throughout the world, is where, again, as I mentioned, we see culture in action. This is where you can gain entrance into ideas of the values, of ideas of belief systems, of gods, forces that influence and govern human life, and also what happens after that human existence once the body dies. And inhumation, which are burial, this is the action of practicing of burying the dead. So one of the early evidence that we have, we know that perhaps the first forms of burial were mainly to protect the body from animals in the wild. But in particular, it was, so far, archaeological evidence has found the early evidence of death rituals, of burial funerary rituals, to date back to about 130,000 years ago, found among Neanderthals. And this is particular, not because, we don't have evidence of bodies before then, but as I mentioned, there's a difference here. This evidence, we find objects buried with the body, flowers, the position of the body. So there was a certain care that and a procedure that took place to place the body in caves, for example. And so this goes beyond the protection of the body from the wild, but also provides evidence of the emergence of belief systems. And perhaps the earliest belief systems and ritual and religious ideas of the anima, the spirit, or the essence of the person, and also ideas of the afterlife. So to think there is something within the person that exists that must be cared for, and that something goes somewhere when that person dies. So scholars believe that early this Neanderthal, the Neanderthal archaeological evidence reflects the earliest forms of belief systems, the emergence of these belief systems. And the fact that they were found in caves also has a symbolic representation for the womb of the earth. So we know that caves in many cultures today, and also in ancient cultures, they reflect like an entrance into the world. So there are portals into the underworld, and not necessarily with these ideas that we use today, and some belief systems considered, going into a burning place or hell or something, very challenging. But archaeologists try to piece together these ideas based on, the objects that they find, and ideas. In particular, the Neanderthal bodies were covered using this red orchard plant, and they would cover the body in a red, that would give this red tint to the body. The body was also placed as in a sleep-like fetal position, with the legs and the knees together, and the hand or the arm under the head as providing like a pillow. So we see placing the body as it is resting, and also back into the fetal position and covered in red. Archaeologists find this as perhaps a symbolic representation for blood. Just as they were born, covered in blood, they return back into the womb of the earth covered in blood as well. So the caves and also burying the body or covering the body with stones, but using objects to accompany the body. This gives archaeological evidence of this, probably the first funerary practices, and reveals again the emergence of questioning of this existential, these existential questions or ideas of what happens after this. So these early evidence, archaeological evidence of bodies found with objects in the caves or buried or covered, these reveal, as I mentioned, the beginning of the ideas of entry into the underworld. So this also reveals that the living, those that surrounded the human, were responsible for caring for the body, caring for perhaps this idea of the anima, the soul, the spirit, or the essence of that human. And they were responsible for guiding that spirit into perhaps the underworld. And we also find that this also reveals the beginning of the spiritual guides, the spiritual specialists. And we're going to use the term shaman very loosely, as I had explained. This is a borrowed term that we just use it in general, rather than to call priest. That would be already comes from an organized, structured religion, belief system. A shaman is emerged as the guide, as the first spiritual guide for humans. And so we see the emergence of also the questions of where does the anima go? And we find, remember in the idea of animism, is that everything has spirit. Nature has spirit. Every living, every creation on earth has spirit. The trees have spirit. The water could have spirit. And therefore, in certain cultures, in the case of the Native American cultures, where the body was buried, was disposed of, that becomes like the nexus point. That becomes a connection to both worlds, to the living and the dead. The spirit of that person remains there, and therefore these places where they are buried become sacred sites. And we are going to dive into sacred sites in our next class. But nonetheless, in this case, the spirit of the ancestors are residing there. This is the house of the ancestors. This is where they are laid to rest. So this land is sacred as their spirit lives on there. And this is where, as well, the ideas of animism emerge, where we see things animated and alive, as well as, in this case, in the case of burial sites. Okay. So with the rise of agriculture emerges this complex idea of the cosmos, and looking up at the sky and this idea of the world above, the levels above, in cases of the celestial sky, ideas of heaven emerge. So the rise of agriculture is very important for human history. And historians, archaeologists will confirm that it is when humans are able to domesticate crops that will allow them to stay sedentary and be able to feed many, many people. This gives rise to the workforce to build these cities and to build these communities around the cities that maintain it. And so this complex architectural development emerges also with the observation of the sky. This is where we find the emergence of specialists, the beginning of organized religion, because here we have specialists devoted to the observations of the celestial world, and astronomers, priests that start paying attention to how the cycles of the heavenly skies and how they have an impact on human life, human agriculture, human behavior. And therefore they start designing buildings and cities in relation to the celestial sky. So here we see the emergence of man and the cosmos, the man in relation, human beings. When I say man, I mean human beings in relationship to the celestial world. So the emergence of cosmology. And this is, again, rooted from the rise of agriculture. You have people that no longer need to move, be mobile, or be separated. They're able to live in an area and be able to provide enough food to survive for a large population. And so from this, we see more elaborate burial funerals that will provide some examples in a moment. And this idea of the celestial and belonging there was mostly associated and separated for those elite, for those in power. Somehow these specialists had a divine connection, whether from ancestors or because they're able to communicate with the divine, with the celestial world. And this is where they find that this is the place where the god or gods reside. So they are we see the separation of this earthly plane and the emergence of the cosmos and man's relationship to that. And from these burial rites, we can see that the elite find a connection and an idea that they are able to return to the celestial sky. And we'll provide an example of the case of Yucatan, of Kukulkan, in a second. So in the case of the Mayas, there is a story in this, for example, the pyramid of Chichen Itza is devoted to Kukulkan. So the story is Kukulkan emerged from the Toltecs, which is central Mexico. And throughout Mesoamerica, we find stories of this foreigner from central Mexico that traveled throughout Mesoamerica and shared his teachings on mathematics, on belief systems, on how to build and have this correlation with the cosmos. The Pyramid of Chichen Itza is a living calendar. It marks the days of the years, it marks the seasons, and it marks the solstice, every change in the season. So Kukulkan emerged from central Mexico, and he prophesied that he would return, and when he would die, he would return to Venus. But he also prophesied that he would return to Earth on one reed. And this is where the story that when the Spaniards arrived, the Mayas believed that he was a return of Kukulkan. But nonetheless, this idea of returning to Venus represents also the emergence of those leaders, those specialists that had this knowledge and guided society in correlation with the cosmos, that they were divine. And therefore, the ruling class from there on were also divine. As I had mentioned before, the Mayas were ruled by theocracy. And these ruling priests had a special communication and a lineage with the ancestors. And from this, they were considered to be divine beings on earth. And so their funerary rites had a different practice than most common people. And this idea that they returned to the stars, and this idea that they would still be able to communicate with the living emerges. And they are not the only ones. We know also for the Vikings as well, having a prior funeral rites, which means burning the body, is very important, because the soul can be released faster this way. And for the Vikings, those as well, it was not only an honor, but it also represented status to undergo a ritual, a funerary rite as such, where the soul can be immediately released and return to the divine, return to the sky. And in the case of Kukulkan, his body was also burned, and when he returned to Venus. We also find this continuity of burning bodies of the prior funeral rites among many cultures in India. In India, there was one particular group known as India Suti Prai. This is where women of the ruling class, and this happened about 700 years ago, women of the ruling class would auto-sacrifice themselves when their husband died in battle. In other words, they sacrificed themselves by also joining their husband's body when it was being burned. And they did this, scholars note that perhaps they did this with the idea to avoid being taken by the victors, and therefore also rooted in the idea of Shiva's wife, where Shiva's wife also sacrificed herself for Shiva. By doing this auto-sacrifice, the soul was also released from the cycles of reincarnation and karma in this case. Mountains and pyramids as the stairways to heaven. We archaeologists have found many cultures that find burying the bodies of pretty much then the elite, the ruling class, in structures, either mountains or pyramid-like structures, to be a representation of the relationship of where the soul goes, where the spirit goes into the heavenly sky. So, for example, here in Mississippi, among Native Americans, there's a Mississippi Mounds that were structured, and on each way, these are natural mountains that were shaped in a pyramid-like form, and stairs were provided, and these were ceremonial and burial centers where they have found bodies buried within this mount. Among the Mayan, one of the most elaborate tombs that have been found is the King Pacal of Chiapas, of Palenque, Mexico. So in the case of mountains and pyramids, they were also known as kind of seen as portals or entryways into the underworld, and that would connect those buried there, mostly the elite, the ruling class, would be connected into portals of the ancestor world. In the case of the Mayas, return to the land of the ancestors in the celestial sky. But we also have evidence here in the U.S. among the mound builders of Mississippi. These were Native American groups that gave natural formations, natural mountains and hills. They shaped them into pyramids, and they provided stairs from all sides leading up to to this pinnacle point at the top, and bodies were also buried within the mountain. And we see this as ideas of portals, or we call it the stairway to heavens. And the burials become very elaborate. Much of these burials that are within these the pyramids, in the case of Mesoamerica, have been raided, and because these rulers were buried with precious jewels. But there is one famous tomb that was discovered in Chiapas, in the archaeological site of Palenque. And this is a former king known as Pacal. And we know of his story and legacy because the Mayas, as I had mentioned, had an elaborate writing system, and the rulers would create these stelas, as we had reviewed, that explain their time, what they ruled, how they came to power, and accomplishments that they had, and also their titles. And so Pacal, his burial site, provides a window to how perhaps many other rulers during his time, because burials are different and they're always changing. But in the case of Pacal, he has this very elaborate mask made out of jade. And jade was one of the most precious stones. It was even more precious than gold. And it is considered to be something to be fortune and to carry on fortune and wealth and luck in the afterlife. Jade stones were also perhaps placed in his mouth, and the body was accompanied by as well other jewelries and foods and offerings, and many times accompanied by servants. They would have to sacrifice servants to accompany the body, and animals as well, as so the king can have assistance in the afterlife. And so here we find, again, in relationship to pyramids and mountains, it was the rulers that were buried within these structures. And so we're going to get into ideas of reincarnation and cycles of life. And one of the most elaborate examples, of course, are the Egyptian burials. In the Egyptian burials, one of the most well-preserved burials that was found was of King Tutankhamun. They also known as King Tut. And while his tomb was one of the smallest, least elaborate tombs compared to all the Egyptian pharaohs, his tomb provides this archaeological evidence for the application and ideas of what happens when the pharaohs died. A King Tut's tomb was very small, and his tomb is nothing in comparison to the other tombs that you find when you visit the Valley of Death in Egypt. So here, for ancient Egyptians, preserving the body was of utmost importance, because the soul was divided in three parts. And a part of the soul remained in the body while the other one journeyed into the afterlife. The scholars have thought that this idea of reincarnation is rooted in the observation of the cycles, of the natural cycles of, for example, like the 4 seasons, and also the sunrise and the sunset. And we find a lot of this referencing in Egyptian burials. And so for ancient Egyptian, the idea of death is not final. On the contrary, this was a very important transition that the spirit, that the soul would go through. So the soul was considered indestructible. It was considered eternal, and it would continue this cyclical process of life, just as the sun sets every day and rises every day, so does the soul. And so here we find that the elite, they were the ones, of course, that had the most elaborate tombs. And we see how far they went in an effort to preserve and protect the body. So the body here is of essential importance, as we see with the other, with the other burials. But in particular, the Egyptians really wanted to care that the body would not be destroyed, disturbed, or decayed. And this is because the idea that the soul was divided in 3 parts. So for the Egyptians, we know that preserving the body was of utmost importance, because the soul, part of the soul, continues in the body. So this is an example. These are pictures that I took from visiting the exhibit of King Tut. And this is just these 2 pictures here. You could see how many layers, how many tombs were done for taking care of the body, aside from the mummification and the ritualistic practice, the ritualistic process that was done to the body itself. So this right here is a picture of the final covering that took over the linen. And you can even see every toe and every finger was covered in gold. But there's the whole mummification process is extremely elaborate and was done by specialists. Even the wrapping, the drying out of the body, all the organs were removed, and they would be put in these vessels, also known as canopic jars. And these vessels had a guardian that would care for them as well and oversee their protection. And the body itself, the only organ that was left was the heart, because the heart, it was thought that it was what contained the essence, the memories of the human being. So the heart remained in the body, but everything else was removed. And it underwent an elaborate process to dry out the body, to try to preserve it. And they would also do certain procedures to have the body not decay or cave in. And in this whole process, prayers, special prayers, magical prayers, amulets were placed. There are so many symbolic representations here that have to do with the idea of the afterlife. The Egyptians were heavily, preoccupied with preparing for this rites of passage, that they left an elaborate guide known as the Book of the Dead, that archaeologists that assist us today in understanding their preparation and why they did what they did. But again, the elite went through an extensive preparation. They created these massive buildings and rooms hidden underground to protect the body from invaders as well. And King Tut, his tomb was preserved, completely preserved, because they had actually forgotten about it. It was so small and the walls had caved in that it actually protected it from looters or invaders. and the amount of gold and objects that they were that they would be placed in these huge rooms were unimaginable. Just what they found in King Tut's burial ground, which is an equivalent to perhaps a small apartment. They found so much gold and statues and games and food and clothing, and so to guide him in the afterlife. So here we're just going to explain just a couple of symbols that stand out and that you may see very commonly associated with ancient Egypt. The beetle, also called as the scarabs, they represent the cycle of life and death and rebirth, and very similar, also very associated with the cycles of the sun, how the sun sets and the sun rises. But also they were protectors of the heart. Again, the heart is what contained the memory. This, if you recall, at the beginning of the semester, we had talked about how there's a lack of organ donations in Japan because they see the essence and the being of the body exist within the whole body. And in the U.S., once a person reaches what we call brain death, that the brain is no longer active or functioning, the families feel more comfortable letting that person go and donating the organs, because the idea of the essence of that person is retained in the brain, the personality. And if the brain dies, then that person is no longer with us. And so in Western culture, we feel much more comfortable giving a second chance of life. In other words, those organs can go to someone. Well, in Egyptian culture, in ancient Egypt, the essence of the person, the memories, was held in the heart. And when the soul would undergo, the part of the soul that would have to undergo through the underworld and face the challenges to reach the afterlife, this plane of where the soul will live eternally, it's kind of almost a paradise. The heart must be guarded to not release any memories that may prevent it from entering this realm. And so the ancient Egyptians believed that the soul had, there was three parts to the soul. And here we have, one is the Ka. So they believe that we have dual souls, as twin souls. And so part of the soul is retained in the body. And this is why it is important to protect the body, because it is still holding that essence, that spirit there. And the other part the other half can go into the other realm. And the part that remains, the Ka, that lives still in the body, this it still must be attended to. It still must be fed, must be given offerings, because the pharaoh has not died. They are just in another plane, but their physical body still retains the soul. The Ba, number 2, it is represented here as a form of a human-like bird, where the soul, the Ka, the part of the spirit can transform into this bird and fly and exit out of the tomb and travel our world, the living world, as long as it returns before sunset. So it would return to the body. It would return to the tomb, to the chamber. And finally, the third part of the soul, the Aka, it is what was taking that journey into the underworld and to reach this part of immortality. And this was not done right away. This was a journey that could take many lifetimes. And therefore, it was very important to send and bury the body in these elaborate chambers with everything that they could possibly need for the afterlife. The other symbol that you might find is this human-like with a jackal face. He represents the protector of the dead. So I'm going to play a short film for you that will give you a visual of what takes place in the afterlife after the burial. But here we see all the preparations that took place to prepare the body. And this reveals the ideas of the afterlife. Here we go.
Ani stands before a large golden scale, where the jackal-headed god Anubis is weighing his heart against a pure ostrich feather. Ani was a real person, a scribe from the Egyptian city of Thebes who lived in the 13th century BCE. And depicted here is a scene from his Book of the Dead, a 78-foot papyrus scroll designed to help him attain immortality. Such funerary texts were originally written only for pharaohs, but with time, the Egyptians came to believe regular people could also reach the afterlife, if they succeeded in the passage. Ani's epic journey begins with his death. His body is mummified by a team of priests who remove every organ except the heart, the seat of emotion, memory, and intelligence. It's then stuffed with a salt called natron and wrapped in resin-soaked linen. In addition, the wrappings are woven with charms for protection and topped with a heart scarab amulet that will prove important later on. The goal of the 2-month process is to preserve Ani's body as an ideal form with which his spirit can eventually reunite. But first, that spirit must pass through the Duat, or underworld. This is a realm of vast caverns, lakes of fire, and magical gates, all guarded by fearsome beasts. Snakes, crocodiles, and half-human monstrosities with names like He Who Dances in Blood. To make things worse, Apep, the serpent god of destruction, lurks in the shadows, waiting to swallow Ani's soul. Fortunately, Ani is prepared with the magic contained within his Book of the Dead. Like other Egyptians who could afford it, Ani customized his scroll to include the particular spells, prayers, and codes he thought his spirit might need. Equipped with this arsenal, our hero traverses the obstacles, repels the monster's attacks, and stealthily avoids Apep to reach the hall of Ma'at, goddess of truth and justice. Here, Ani faces his final challenge. He is judged by 42 Ancestor gods, who must be convinced that he has lived a righteous life. Ani approaches each one, addressing them by name and declaring a sin he has not committed. Among these negative confessions, or declarations of innocence, he proclaims that he has not made anyone cry, is not an eavesdropper, and has not polluted the water. But did Ani really live such a perfect life? Not quite, but that's where the heart scarab amulet comes in. It's inscribed with the words, "Do not stand as a witness against me," precisely so Ani's heart doesn't betray him by recalling the time he listened to his neighbor's fight, or washed his feet in the Nile. Now it's Ani's moment of truth, the weighing of the heart. If his heart is heavier than the feather, weighed down by Ani's wrongdoings, it'll be devoured by the monstrous Ammit, part crocodile, part leopard, part hippopotamus, and Ani will cease to exist forever. But Ani is in luck. His heart is judged pure. Ra, the sun god, takes him to Osiris, god of the underworld, who gives him final approval to enter the afterlife. In the endless and lush field of reeds, Ani meets his deceased parents. Here there is no sadness, pain, or anger, but there is work to be done. Like everyone else, Ani must cultivate a plot of land, which he does with the help of a Shabti doll that had been placed in his tomb. Today, the papyrus of Ani resides in the British Museum, where it has been since 1888. Only Ani, if anyone, knows what really happened after his death. But thanks to his Book of the Dead, we can imagine him happily tending his crops for all eternity.
All right, so that gives you a visual. And if you ever get a chance to visit a museum exhibit that brings the King Tut and Egyptian tombs, you will be marveled by all the symbolism and preparation, all the magical spells and prayers that were done. His tomb had all four cardinal points had a guardian, each one guarding prepared with a special prayer in protection for his body and for his soul. All right, so let's go on to other examples of reincarnation. Okay, next we're going to see a video on a practice known as Nakbet. And this is a Hindu Balinesian cremation ceremony. And this, before I present this video, I just want to explain it so you can understand and pay attention to what's going on and the symbolism. And this is first, it's a syncretism between Balinesian animist idea that, again, animism, that the spirit continues and it resides, and it could be in different places, and also mixed with Hinduism belief system. So the body must be burned in order for the spirit to be released. And when the spirit is released, it could begin its process, its transition into the other realm, and eventually reincarnate into the family. But this is a very elaborate preparation. And if you ever travel to Bali, you might come across, just as in New Orleans, where the jazz funeral becomes a public display and you can join. In Bali, those that are very wealthy or that did the preparation well ahead of time, because this is an extremely costly ceremony that requires as well the assistance of the community. But in Bali, you will see as well these displays, these parades, and the people involved in it, and food preparation and so forth. And so what is taking place here is when a person, in the case where the person has not prepared ahead of time, the body must be buried. And the body is buried and also covered in coconut leaves to keep the spirit of the person in the body, because it has not undergone this cremation ceremony, this pyre ceremony. And so the spirit could wander off and become a ghost. And when we talk about the idea of ghost, it is the idea of a spirit that is not resting. And when a spirit is not resting, it could cause havoc and illness among the living, among the family members. And here we find, remember why I talked about this idea that how we deal with the body is not only a personal, but also a social responsibility. There is a personal and social consequence. Personally, the spirit it will not be resting. It is not being released. It can wander off and enter this realm of havoc and unrest and become a ghost. Socially, it is the living, it is those that, the family members in this case, that are responsible for making sure that the spirit of that person is released, or they also face the consequence. So the body must be buried. And again, a process is made to retain the spirit there. In the meantime, it could take years. It could, depending on the family's financial situation, it could take some time to save up the money to carry out this ceremony. And once the money is collected, a wooden sarcophagus is created in the shape of an animal. It could be a bull, an elephant, a lion, and they make it into a tower where once they are ready, the body is unburied and prepared in linen, and then the body is transferred into this sarcophagus, into this animal-shaped sarcophagus, this tower. Again, everything is very symbolic to the tower leading up to the sarcophagus, and then it is burned. But in leading the body to the sarcophagus, the people carrying it must go around in circles. And when they're going around in circles, they're trying to distract the spirit so it does not find its way back to the family or be too attached to the area that it would be a ghost. So the goal here is to release the raw, which in this case represents the spirit or the soul. It must be burned in order for it to be purified and set free. And when it's set free, it enters into the realm of the other world and awaits its time to reincarnate and return, usually reincarnation into the family. And so again, this is a very, very elaborate and expensive, and you can find burials of videos of this on YouTube of Bali cremation ceremonies, and those that you'll see mostly in the videos that tourists have been able to document. Again, they're usually from the elite class or people that have really saved up. One very important thing when these ceremonies are being carried out, they are joyous. They are supposed to be a public celebration with food offerings, with people celebrating the person's life and not showing any type of sadness or crying. And this is important because emotions can distract the spirit from being released. And so the final preparation is considered one of the most essential parts of human existence. To release the body, to release the soul from the body is essential. Let me provide this short film. Here we go. That is the tower that is carrying the body. So you can have an idea of how many people participate and how many people as well must be fed.
Mulai acara pengabenannya ini, prosesnya itu sebetulnya mulai dari kemarin udah kita pergi ke pura-pura, ke Kayangan 3, kita minta mohon izin kepada Tuhan Yang Maha Esa agar upacara pengabenan bapak saya ini bisa berjalan dengan baik, dengan selamat. Kalau acara pengambilan tulang yang tadi pagi itu namanya ngebet. Kita bilang ngebet. Ngebet itu menggali. Kalau di bahasa Indonesia menggali. Kita mengambil tulangnya. Dan proses upacaranya, Arab tadi udah bisa lihat kan. Kita pengambilan tulang, kita tarik. Tujuannya kita menarik itu agar arwah yang kita aben itu bisa bangun. Namun tidak masih di sana. Itu tujuannya.
And do you see the leaves that they're holding there? So the leaves accompany the bones to keep the spirit.
nih man, jadi nih barang itu. Gade kan nih.
Apa nih weling?
Udah lu kinyangan marubik. Si kate hijau tuh kayak gade bit kayak itu.
Sudah bikin aja ada sabun minyak ben.
Gede nak jundor kan.
Sudah lu amun tuh. Jadi baru ben.
Dok, saya aku sabun nih, jangan sabun. Tuh di tas ini sedikit nih. Mana? Ini di tas itu. Pak.
Jangan kasih. Jangan jadi ikutan malu aku yang Ben.
Sini depan langsung kayak gini nih. Kan bukan ini belakang.
Setelah selesai di kuburan, tadi kita bawa ke tempat yang itu namanya salon. Sudah itu arwah apa tulang yang kita ambil itu kita semayamkan di sana 3 hari. Setelah itu diupacarai, ya kita tinggal di sana selama 3 hari. Kita bawa ke kuburan. Semua tulang yang kita ambil tadi itu nanti dinaikkan ke wadah, ya wadah itu. Nanti kita pikul bersama-sama ke tempat kuburan sebelum dibakar.
Do you see how they're going in circles? They want to make sure they distract the spirit.
Bagaimana perasaan waktu di kuburan dan lihat bapaknya lagi?
Pada awalnya terserahnya. Saya tidak menyangka dan sedih. Saya udah berusaha menahan itu. Saya udah berusaha menahan untuk tidak sedih, tapi tidak bisa. Saya selalu terbayang. Saya terbayang wajah bapak saya. Sedih sekali. Terus terangnya masih bapak saya itu, saya belum bisa membahagiakan mereka, belum bisa. Dulu saya sama keluarga, sama kakak-kakak menderita sekali, Pak. Dan sekarang setelah saya bisa makan, saya punya kegiatan, Saya punya sedikit uang, Pak. Tapi saya tidak bisa membahagiakan bapak saya. Saya berusaha untuk tabah. Saya hanya bisa berdoa semoga bapak saya bisa diterima di sisi Tuhan Yang Maha Esa. Semasa bapak saya masih hidup, Pak. Tapi saya sekarang rela, saya ikhlaskan bapak saya untuk meninggalkan saya dan keluarga saya. Mudah-mudahan bapak saya mendapatkan tempat yang baik di sisi Tuhan.
Here we go. So at the end, the way this ceremony concludes is that once the body is burned, the family collects what is left of the bones, and the remaining bones are collected and blessed by a specialist, by a spiritual specialist, and then they are released into the sea. And this concludes the official release of the Ruh, the spirit. And so we have, this is just a summary of it. And so we could see how it is very important, and you see how many people participate in this ritual, and it is considered to be the most important part of one's existence, to be able to transition, to release the soul and open up that opportunity to be reincarnated into the family lineage. There are other examples in Indonesia among the Toran people. They have a very different, unique way of caring for the body. For them, the body remains within their household, and they live with the corpse. They are seen as caring for the body, and the body the person is temporarily asleep or is ill, and they will feed the body and care for them as if they, as if they're still alive. It is not until they are able to, in a similar case, save up the money to be able to conduct another elaborate ceremony where they make offerings using water buffaloes and pigs, and they can release the soul of the person. And here again we have symbols of status, and those that here we have a picture of also bodies that are placed in a cliff are on the side of a mountain. And these bodies or we can call them mummies, are also set once this elaborate offering of buffalo, water buffalo, and other animals are done, to be able to. This is where they can be placed, and this is considered, as we had mentioned before, using mountains or structures. These are considered as to be gateways to the heavenly bodies. I'm going to show you a video of this practice. It could be a bit disturbing for some, so if it's too much, of course you have, you can not watch it if you wish. Here we go. This is pretty short. It's only about 9 minutes. Oh, sorry.
Constant presence in Indonesia's island of Sulawesi. For centuries, the dead have been sharing space with the living.
Khususnya bagi ini orang Toraja itu, tidak ada yang takut sama mayat karena sudah terbiasa, sudah adat.
After someone dies, it can take months, sometimes even years, before a funeral takes place. Here, even funerals are not goodbye.
Wajahnya sudah berubah jadi ndak ini, kadang cuma tulang saja begitu.
Is this a morbid obsession? Or could it be a healthier way of dealing with the grief of losing a loved one? It's the great unspoken, the taboo. Something we keep away from us. Something I have had to face recently when I lost my dad, but I don't know how to deal with. Most of us don't know how to think or talk about death, but there are some people who do think they know. In the Toraja region of Sulawesi in Indonesia, centuries-old customs make the dead a constant part of day-to-day life. This is Danduro. He's 86 years old and died over 2 years ago.
Kita yakin bahwa dia masih mendengar. Karena kita yakin bahwa arwahnya masih bersama dia karena masih sakit. Sekali kita sudah Kristen, anak-anak dekat juga seperti itu. Datang rutin, ada yang tinggal di luar.
Ancient animist beliefs intertwine with newer religions, resulting in unique rituals. Here, funerals take place months and sometimes even years after somebody passes away. In the meantime, the deceased is kept in the house and cared for as if he's sick, not dead.
Dan kita masih memberi makan selama dia dianggap masih dalam sakit. Jadi 2 kali makan juga sehari. Masih kita siapkan juga rokok, berkesukaan, kopi. Dan kalau tidak baik keperawatannya selama di bumi ini, mereka akan kembali mengganggu.
To preserve corpses, formalin is often injected into the body. My dad died 3 years ago, and we buried him in 2 days. It was all very sudden. It was all very bam bam. And to be honest with you, a few years on, I still feel like I haven't adjusted. It was just too sudden. I'm still in a bit of a shock. Does this help you?
Dikuburkan secepat-cepatnya kan kita merasa cepat kehilangan. Kalau kami orang Toraja, ya makanya kan kami lama-lama karena kami masih menganggap masih bersama-sama terus. Lakukan ini masih apa yang seperti kita lakukan pembersihan, masih memberikan apa yang masih diperlukan selama sakit.
What's really incredible is that none of these kids seem to be fazed by the fact that there is a dead person lying here and everybody's so calm. Like many people, I've never really liked the idea of being around corpses. So much so that when my own father passed away, I refused to go and see his body one last time before his burial. Something I still feel guilty about.
Jadi perasaan takut itu tidak ada. Khususnya bagi ini orang Toraja itu, tidak ada yang takut sama mayat karena sudah terbiasa. Dia orangnya sangat baik, penyayang sama anak-anaknya, masih ada hubungan batin. Dan itu jom tandok mabela lang oray rampol asil tirang kami. Mamali le, dami tiramban le, dami sengke.
This is Paulo Sirinda. He died over 12 years ago, and his daughter looks after him.
Bapak ini dia orangnya sangat baik, penyayang sama anak-anaknya. Masih ada hubungan batin.
This process, having him in the house, well, in your case for 12 years, do you think this helps you deal with the grief?
Ya itu pastinya, pasti membantu. Karena kalau kita menurut perasaan kami anak-anaknya, kalau begitu cepat dikubur, ya pasti cepat merasa kehilangan begitu.
I wish I had that kind of opportunity to adjust to my dad's death. I mean, would I have his body in my house a few years after his death? I'm not sure. But I sure would have liked the opportunity and time to adjust, so it wasn't all so sudden. So it wasn't like 1 minute he's there and the next he's gone forever.
Paling ya datang disapa, nenek tidur terus, tidak bangun-bangun. Paling sapa, ayo bangun, pergi makan.
Sirinda will stay lying here until his family have saved up enough money for a grand funeral.
Ini artinya ya baguslah kalau dia lama-lama di atas rumah supaya anggapan kita masih bersama. Orang Toraja itu, jadi kita harus mempersiapkan ritualnya dari.
This is a traditional Torajan funeral. They often last for days, and dozens of pigs and buffaloes get sacrificed. Funerals are important because this is where the deceased is finally interred and considered dead. But even this is not goodbye. The physical relationship between the dead and the living continues long after death, even after burials. Once every couple of years, families bring the coffins of long-departed relatives out of their graves and open them up for a big family reunion. The ritual is called matnen, or cleansing of the corpse.
From the sociological perspective, that's a kind of keeping social interaction between those who are still alive and those already died.
The coffin is finally open. This is Maria Solo, and she's covered in her most treasured belongings. Thank you. They want me to show what she looked like before and what she looks like now. She died 3 years ago and got buried 2 years ago. They kept her in the house for 1 year.
Orang tua sudah dilaksanakan sekarang sangat lega, karena sudah dilaksanakan. Supaya besok nanti lihat itu mukanya orang tua, saya sangat menyayangi sama saya, tidak pernah marah sama saya. Jadi saya itu saja anunya tentang orang tua ini.
Apa namanya, kayak kita maunya kalau kita sebagai manusia pasti dibilang coba orang tua saya masih hidup, seperti halnya yang saya alami. Kalau kita kerantau pasti kalau macam macam anak mantu bilang panggil anak.
How do you think Manene helps you deal with the grief?
Ya bisa juga dikatakan ekspresi kesedihan, macam kita orang perantau begitu bisa kayak meringankan beban yang kita pikul. Orang tua kita kalau meninggal pasti kita ingin melihat.
All of this is so different to how I dealt with my father's death, or so I thought.
What did you do to your fathers?
Buried him.
Buried him, yeah? And then until now?
I
You
visit his
visit
grave
his
sometimes.
grave sometimes. You did actually manene. In different way.
How?
Yeah. Because you visit the grave of your father because you still remember him as your father. And you still have an emotional relationship with him. Your love to your father never ended. Right? And that's the principle of manene.
So perhaps the principles behind the rituals here are not very different from most other cultures. remembering our dead, is something most of us try to do, but Torajans don't leave that to chance, and for them, there certainly appears to be great comfort from the rituals around death.
All right, so here we saw two practices. We saw the funerary burial practice of ideas of where the spirit resides. The spirit has not left. That person has not technically died according to their belief system, and therefore they can reside within the household until they are able to carry out this elaborate funeral rite that would officially release the spirit from the body, and that person would then be considered dead. And after that, then you still see the continuity and relationship of, then it transforms into an ancestor cult, where they maintain a different type of relationship and communication with the corpse. So this, while it's very different from anything we've probably seen, we have to also remember we try to look into the significance of it for them, and also try to find some comparison to others. As at the end, he was pointing out to the interviewer how she visits her father's grave and feels this communication and relationship with him, because he lives on in her memory. And this is a very similar practice that is carried on when they remove the corpse from the burial site. Here, the way they see the body and what happens in this transition is very different than the way in the Western world, how we treat the body and how we treat the idea of death. And right now, there are so many changes taking place to our Western funerary practices. And it has to do a lot, and we're going to see concepts here of, how people view the body, and again, the relationship. And some we try to preserve the body, and some we let go of the body because the spirit no longer resides there. But one of the changes that is taking place in the burial rites within our Western culture is this trying to transition into a more eco-friendly burial. We know now that with all the chemicals, the involvement that takes place in funeral homes, how this eventually is affecting our environment. It will eventually seep into our water system. So these are chemicals that are, that are in the soil. And as well as, the space and cost of burials keep increasing every year. And so there have been a rise of these eco-friendly kind of organizations that will bury bodies in the forest, and people prepare again ahead of time as they select to do this. And the body is treated very much as we saw, as I had talked about in the case of my grandmother in Mexico. There's no chemicals injected into the body to preserve it. The funeral must be done within a short period of time, within the first 24 hours, as the body begins to decompose. So here in the U.S., there's a transition looking for natural habitats where we don't cut down the trees or disrupt the habitat, but and simply bury the body without any chemicals that would preserve it. The other changes that are taking place, again, kind of looking into a recycling of the body. And this is associated with the spirit is no longer residing there, is reef burials. We find these in places such as Florida or in coastal areas where they have done underground man-made reefs with statues and artwork, and the bodies are cremated and placed there. The full body is not placed there, only the cremation, and therefore it becomes part of the ecosystem, and it also provides the creation of these reefs and food for sea life. So it's a part of recycling. And in more innovative recent ideas, and this is coming from Italy, the idea of creating a capsule and having a tree root grow from this capsule. And here there's different ideas. There's different capsules. There are some small ones that are for cremation, and so the ashes are put into this capsule, buried with a tree to grow from it. And then other cases, there are very large capsules where the body is put back into a fetal position and encapsulated within this, and this is supposed to nurture the rise of the tree. But we also have different adjustments. In some cases, humans donate their body to science. And here, there's many things that your body can contribute to the field of science. One is a very famous art exhibit that travels throughout the world. And you may be able to see this one day I saw this exhibit in Houston, and it is called a Body Works, and I believe the title is Body Works, if I'm not mistaken. And these are bodies that were donated, and they dry them out. They dry out everything, kind of as they mummify them, but so we can see the internal organs and what, in many cases, you see the innovations that the medical system has had, as replacing bones, replacing body parts with metal objects, replacing valves, and different things that are done in surgery to prolong life. And these mummified bodies exhibit that. It is a very interesting exhibit to see. The other change that is taking place, and it is becoming more and more common, is if part of the ashes of someone that has been cremated can be turned into artwork or jewelry. And these are called diamond memorials. And therefore the ashes can be sent to, there are special jewelry shops that will take the ashes and create these gems. And they usually turn out blue because of the composition of the ashes and so forth. And they can create jewelry to distribute among the family. And therefore you always have you have a memory of the person with you. And for those that want to preserve the body, and the idea that the essence of the person resides within the brain and within the body, they have created this option for freezing the body, just as embryos can be frozen and preserved to where they could be used at a later time. This idea of freezing the body in such a way without entering the state of turning it into ice. This is a futuristic goal. The futuristic goal is to be able to bring that person back to life as we advance in technology and the medical system. And of course, it is very expensive, and the wealthy people of very, very high economic status are the ones that can afford this. But again, this is the idea that the essence of the person has not left the body, and the memory and the person will one day be reawakened. And lastly, this is also becoming a very popular form of funerals, is to create, to place part of the ashes, the cremation, into fireworks, and therefore create, do a celebration, host a party, and part of your ashes are lit up in the sky. You turn into fireworks. And the last one that I've also seen is that they create rockets that can leave the Earth's atmosphere. So this brings up other questions of, our DNA leaving this Earth's atmosphere. We return to stardust in the cosmos. So these are rockets that explode once it leaves the Earth's. Okay, all right. So we'll stop there. This will conclude our topic of death rituals, and I hope it provides just a glimpse of the variety of worldviews and belief systems of this existential question of what happens to the essence of humans once the body dies, or once it stops breathing. And there we also see different ideas of what people categorize as the person is officially gone. There's different processes and different ideas. Okay, so if you have any questions, like always, please email me. Thank you.